So I'm going to provide you with one of the resources, the tools that Premier have created as part of our work to date. And I'm the work package one lead, and that's regarding stakeholder engagement and connection. Um, and I'm the University of Galway, and we're one of the partners. Um, of course, this is now on the website, so it is free and available for you to access. There is a longer version on the website, a print version, and then a synopsized version in the form of a tool sheet. So this is where it is, and there will be a link shared in the chat. But for now, I need to give some background to that, to set the scene as to where this has originated from and the importance of it, especially in the AI era that we are now in and that we found ourselves in. I suppose when we started the project 2 years ago, this wasn't the space we were in. The tools we were creating didn't have to take into account as much of that, but now this is what we're faced with. So such a tool can help, and hopefully I can paint that picture. Just to reiterate, Jordy's introduction earlier, 40% of the Horizon Cluster 6 calls covering food, bioeconomy, natural resources, agriculture, and environment require this multi-actor approach. So it's a fundamental pillar of project eligibility. And I think that the multi-actor makeup of this panel is testament to what's needed. The different voices across, and just as we've heard from the seed funding applicants, successful applicants, it's exactly the type of partner that's needed to fulfill this requirement. You know why it matters? This authentic involvement of ACAS actors across policy, research, and practice will boost the relevance and long-term societal impact of project outcomes and results amongst the users or so-called end users. Really, a return on investment on these projects. These are multi-million European-wide projects. So just to have research involved, for example, publishing papers in the academic realm that will never see impact, it's not good enough anymore. So the European Commission want to see a return on investment, and the best way to do that is to have the multi-actor approach, different actors in the space feeding in to boost its relevance and adoption and societal impact. However, there are a lot of challenges in relation to enacting this. It's an ideology almost, but to enact there's challenges. This multi-actor mirage, it may not all be what it seems. It might look good on paper, they're involving certain actors, for example, but in practice it falls apart. There might be dominant, the coordinator may be dominant and they know how to incorporate the right language into a proposal, but it's tokenistic engagement rather than true co-creation. And the problem with that is that if it's not truly co-created, there won't be the same level of trust and co-ownership in the results of the project. And then the long-term impact, the sustained use of the project outputs won't be won't be uptake. There won't be an uptake in the future. So it's a short-term benefit, but if there's not a true co-creation of the multi-actor approach, and hopefully by addressing these so-called elephants in the room, I'm going to bring forth a few prominent ones that are an issue, and I'm sure a lot of you will be able to identify with them. Um, these are common pitfalls, and I suppose by bringing them to light, you can challenge um, a lot of the proposal writers that might have a lot of experience in this space. But now we're faced with an increased focus on the multi-actor approach. It's time to really engage. So this, it's pretty self-explanatory, but the box ticking consortia, what I mean by consortia is the project team. So proposals may include token partners just to look inclusive, without real planning for their engagement or contribution, their meaningful contribution. So on paper, it ticks these certain boxes, but when you delve deeper into it, it doesn't have the true depth and value of the multi-actor approach. The participation theatre, in that, again, it relates to the last, but so farmers, advisors, and civil society, for example. There's other actors, are the more harder to reach or the underrepresented ones. They're invited to consult, but not to decide. And the power then stays in the hands of a few academics, in a lot of cases, or policy elites, who are the experts in the area. And they know how to work the system essentially. But if the true multi-actor approach isn't incorporated within, there's going to be a lot of knowledge lost. The voices aren't being heard, and it doesn't align to the multi-actor approach. A huge one at the moment is this use of AI templates, the human disconnect as a result. So the automated tools streamline proposal writing, and they're being increasingly used and will continue to do so. And we're not advocating against their use. They're a very useful tool, but they do flatten proposals into generic top-down blueprints, because it's all based on prior knowledge, I suppose, and the coding that goes into it, etc. But for these innovative voices that have yet to come to the fore, when you're trying to decide research innovation projects, for example, the algorithm can't listen to that voice. The standardized tools will overlook the lived experiences, the real world nuances, and the local voices, and they'll fall through the cracks. So, for example, the seed funding applicants, for example, there's a lot of on the ground knowledge that's really has to be brought to the fore. But the likes of ChatGPT, for example, will miss that because it's just not possible. It can't listen. So very useful, but just take into account that it's not the be all and end all. One other issue is this impact on paper, not in practice. So you could have 10 academic publications, enhance the reputation and profile of the university that's leading the project, for example, but it hasn't trickled down into, say, agricultural practice magazines, for example, the farming or farming social media channels. There's it's reduced to such virtual platforms, but there's no real uptake or ownership or legacy of the results. So that's just another limitation or elephant in the room that needs to be addressed. And again, you can align this with what I've already spoken about, but there's mismatched partners, and as a result, there's missed opportunities. And a lot of times, project partners are chosen for convenience, but they're not complementary. And this leads to siloed work packages, duplicated efforts, or disengaged stakeholders. This convenience, we know who we know, our networks, it's a safe way to do so. However, if you don't challenge yourself and take a step into the unknown, essentially with some partners, you're not going to be able to benefit the multi-actor approach because you're sticking in a silo that it's a safe space, and innovation is all about challenging and opening minds. So it's another issue. When you look at the research on this limitations, there's insufficient attention has been given to the inclusion of this tacit local knowledge in the last Horizon program, and this genuine co-creative working together from the all along the project, from defining the problem to implementing the solution, had been a limitation and continues to do so, but at least it's been brought forth and evaluated in academic research. So it's up to the practitioners and the policy to now enact that. So this is a logic about around this checklist. So this is where the checklist comes in essentially. Um, it's a practical and reflective tool designed to help project consortia pause, ask the hard questions, and hopefully co-create project proposals that are inclusive, balanced, and built for impact. So the multi-actor approach isn't just for compliance. It's not just this tick the box, oh, we needed to do this, but actually there's a true value of including, and again, the legacy and future uptake of results. This will be predominantly in the second part of the presentation after lunch when I go into this, but this meaningful integration, as I've said, and there's a step-by-step guidance towards collaboration and engagement across all project stages, from initial thoughts, processes to the final submission. And, as I've said, to move proposals beyond formal compliance, to embrace the core ethos of the multi-actor approach principles, co-creation, relevance, and impact. And also, hopefully, that we can open this up further by reducing this over-reliance on the so-called experts, by fostering trust, shared ownership, and diverse representation in the Horizon Europe space. I would like to point out that this work, as well as being developed from the seven multi-actor core principles outlined by the European Commission, but it's also grounded in Premier's internal stakeholder engagement strategy that we used as a project to engage, say, with all of you at the very outset. And this was part of the initial work package one deliverable stakeholder engagement and communication plan. We developed a five-step strategy. And I suppose just to break that down, the multi-actor approach, it's obviously pitched as a good practice. There has been some attempts within academia to create a definition for the multi-actor approach and good practices around that. But as Jordi alluded to earlier, some of the terminology and wording, say even from the Commission, changes somewhat now and again. Definitions within academia are fragmented. But within strategic management literature, for example, at the broader, maybe corporate level, they also talk about stakeholder engagement. And it's a cornerstone of the social responsibility of corporations. So what Premier did was we took a step back and said, well, there isn't a framework for agriculture, forestry, and related sectors. Let's see how it can be applied to enhance our stakeholder engagement within our project. And ACAS is now so central, agricultural knowledge innovation systems is so central to sustainable knowledge integration and innovation support within the aforementioned sectors. So the gap that was there was a concern, but we addressed this by bringing together the literature, the good practice literature from that field of research into this forestry, agriculture, and related sectors space to help strengthen the multi-actor inclusion and stakeholder engagements in Horizon Europe projects and related instruments such as EIP Agri operational groups, which is also very applicable, this checklist. But also I'm aware that there's been some interest in the circular bio-based European joint undertaking around the multi-actor approach and the use of this checklist within. So hopefully that this will also be applicable. So where this is the origin of this is backed by research as well. So it's we've taken into account policy and also research in its formation. And I suppose a central aspect, won't go into it in great depth, but this quadruple helix model of innovation is core, say, in the corporate world around engaging different stakeholders. And it breaks it into four spheres, relatively simple, straightforward spheres that we're all familiar with. But it's a nice model to maybe base future projects from. If you could incorporate these spheres, you'll have a multi-actor consortium because it's a dynamic, multi-directional collaboration beyond the traditional top-down knowledge transfer. And in order to evolve it into a checklist, we had to do so because our stakeholder engagement strategy was about guiding engagement with all of you for the Premier project, but to extend it out for tailored towards the needs of proposal development teams, we needed to essentially translate it into a different format. And this is where the checklists come in. And, proposal writers benefit from concise, adaptable tools that support early stage design and co-creative efforts, such as a checklist. So it is a useful tool. And this, again, the origins for this, just to back it up, that this is based on something very solid and it's published in Open Research Europe, that we've taken into account theory and practice in relation to its development. And again, we're in an AI era. They're being used for digital tools and templates for proposal development. But it's very, very important to now safeguard the human, participatory, and relational elements of Horizon Europe projects. It's more important than ever. And 40% now require the multi-actor approach in this AI area. And hopefully this checklist can ensure that the components are not overlooked and are clearly articulated in final submissions. So this is why it's also important to keep pace with the world we're in now. So after the break, I'll bring the checklist to life through a hypothetical Horizon Europe Cluster 6 call. Again, I have a great love for sheep. I'm a sheep farmer myself, so I wanted to make it as relatable even for myself as possible. So I want to just create a hypothetical call around improving the sustainability and genetic performance of the organic sheep farming sector in upland regions across Europe. Even looking at the title, a lot of elements there, a lot of actors need to be involved to enact that project between geneticists, upland farming groups, the sheep sector in general, farming organizations, researchers. It's just something to maybe apply the checklist in a real life setting to ease interpretability. Um, and before, we go for the lunch, I suppose if there's any thoughts on what I have brought to the fore so far in relation to the needs of the multi-actor approach and what would be needed for such a project in the upland regions around sheep farming and genetic improvement, put it into chat just so we can stimulate your thoughts. And over the break, we can have a look at that and might just lead us into the next half. But for now, enjoy your break. So, I suppose to synopsize this, I've set the scene in the first part, I suppose to outline the challenges and where it was developed from to justify its legitimacy and its potential strength and usefulness. But now it's to apply it. You know, Hopefully it can support the meaningful integration of the multi-actor approach across all proposal stages. And we're not blind to the fact that there's a lot of challenges. And, as rightly was pointed out, the evaluators also need to be aware of this. And Premier will be feeding this back again to the Commission to ensure so. This is in itself a co-creative process amongst us all as a European funded project. And again, to move proposals beyond the formal compliance to embrace the core ethos of the multi-actor approach. And these are the five elements that have been developed from the analysis of our previous work and in line with the multi-actor approach commission guidelines. And, they are essential elements to include within the proposals. And again, as I mentioned, we'll be bringing the checklist to life through this hypothetical Horizon Europe Cluster 6 call. And again, just to reemphasize, to point out again that even the title in itself showcases that there's a lot of actors that are needed here to really make a difference. Of course, the genetic performance can be enhanced, say, from a research perspective, the researchers will have it carried out, but unless the farmers are applying it on their flocks, it'll be a little avail. And also the genetic performance, the researchers may have applied it to lowland sheep breeding, not only flocks, but regions and the different landscapes environment. The upland regions, uh, community groups, for example, are needed to be able to apply it in that setting. So, and across Europe, the wonderful thing about the European Union and Europe is that of our cultural diversity, but also that brings certain challenges around the different types of landscape, for example, for sheep farming, different language barriers, for example, for certain, even dealing with the farming community. There's a lot to take into account. So hopefully the checklist can bring it to life. So I want to be able to translate this into a real world practice using a practical example, make it easier for proposal developers to use and apply and to promote this inclusivity, co-creation, lasting impact. So the first element and is around this designing a well-balanced multi-actor project consortium. And we do have a very, very impressive consortium builder tool developed by our partners in Ilvo that can be used alongside this. That really has the foundations of how to really develop it. But the checklist is, okay, does it have the elements within the consortium builder? So it is worth checking out the consortium builder, and hopefully there might be a link or whatever shared in the chat by partners, or maybe there was a webinar on it recently as well, so there'll be a link on that. So I just wanted to mention that to attribute that as well to this. So, this quadruple helix model innovation that I did mention, this government policy, science academia, industry, business, science, society, community, if your consortium can have a balance of those key actors, you will have a socially grounded, scientifically sound, and policy relevant solution from your project. You're going to avoid tokenism and promote meaningful collaboration. And also, it's designed to meet Horizon Europe multi-actor approach criteria by incorporating the quadruple helix model innovation based on strategic management literature. It can help bring this diverse, balanced teams across. So that's essentially the makeup of element one. And when you want to inclusivity in action means that you will prioritize underrepresented voices. So when you're building consortium, prioritize the underrepresented voices and give them active roles in this co-creation in governments. So using the example of the project, for example, it needs to be an EU-wide consortium. That's first and foremost. And to have representation from across these different four spheres of this innovation model. So when you're looking at government policy, try to have maybe national organic certification bodies that will align with the organic sheep sector. Science academia, there's a lot of livestock genetic labs, rural studies centres, and agroecology institutes, providing that scientific rigor that's needed. Industry business, there's a lot of organic breeding, small, medium-sized enterprises, even artificial insemination companies, rural innovation hubs, because think about this when you're looking at the title itself, you're looking at the improving the sustainability of the sheep sector in upland regions, if you break it into those elements. So the broader rural sustainability of the community also needs to be taken into account. So there could be rural innovation hubs that are also applicable. So this is really isn't, I'm only giving examples of designing a well-balanced project consortium. And then, of course, the science society community. So you could have upland sheep breed societies, farming cooperatives, local action groups, the LAGs, very important in rural areas and have a really good reach, and they have an awareness of funding and how it works on the ground. And, this lived experience can come to the fore. And as I said, this inclusivity is intentional, make it intentional. So in a lot of cases, to reach the harder to reach, a special effort is needed to include these underrepresented actors. There could be younger farmer organizations, rare breed societies. And by bringing these to the fore, they'll amplify a diverse voice and a need, a local need. And again, to challenge the AI, challenge the experts that, yeah, and also to bring to fore, say, for evaluators, that these are also actors that need to be taken into account when evaluating these proposals. So it's to really embrace the core ethos. So the second key element is this ensuring genuine multi-actor knowledge sharing. And sharing is a key word here. It's not knowledge transfer. Sharing is side by side, not top down. Traditionally, in a lot of cases, that's what's been happening. So cluster six proposals that require the multi-actor approach should treat knowledge sharing as a two-way, ongoing process that values the practitioner's lived experiences, the realities of the practitioners, alongside scientific and policy expertise. It's not a one-way flow from experts to end users. There needs to be input in between to really have value. And again, that important aspect of to have longevity in the results, that they will be used because there's a co-ownership. The co-created tools will reflect reality then. So they're shaped by those on the ground from the outset. They're not just laboratory models, for example. They're not just, say, in the context of the project I'm going to speak about, a genetic model for increasing the performance of a certain breed of sheep. They're actually, the farmers are also feeding in some way, or farmer organizations. Mutual learning builds trust. There's also a greater trust in the project if there's more collaboration. Again, perhaps this could be perceived as idealistic in a sense, but these are the core elements that are needed. And with evaluation, looking at this more and more, this is what's needed. And if there's a joint ownership, it increases this likelihood of long-term impact, as I mentioned. And this bottom-up insights drive solutions. So practical knowledge and experiential insights from practitioners will help ensure the real-world relevance and adoption. That's the fact in the matter in relation to if the true goal is to make a difference to the sustainability and performance of sheep farming in the upland regions, you need to have the practitioners feeding in. And the consortium, this hypothetical consortium, is moving beyond this fragmented communication to a more deeper collaboration, advancing the genuine co-creation and alignment with multi-actor values through every step of the project. And again, as projects, a lot of you are thinking about being partners, for example. When you're voicing your arguments, for example, in relation to, say, proposal development, bring this to the fore as well. Use this language that this is what's needed and cite, say, the Premier project. This is good practice. This is what the evaluators will increasingly be looking for. Use it as a tool, even in that sort of a setting, by fostering real-world EU-wide collaboration. It was mentioned earlier with one of the seed funding, the living labs. So there could be a living lab established on organic pilot farms in upland regions in Ireland, Spain, and Romania, for example, because of the diverse geographical, the landscape, the soil type, for example, different scales of farming models. This could see how these breeding solutions reflect on farm realities. And if you can build within the consortium inclusive dialogue and learning, so if you have multi-actor, multi-stakeholder discussion groups, for example, or panels, you bring the geneticists, some of the veterinary associations, organic certification bodies. You could have socioeconomic researchers looking at the broader rural sheep breed societies, LAGs, bring them to the table as a sort of a discussion. This will help ensure that the diverse voices shape the project, and also to challenge maybe the coordinator, say they're an academic institution that, well, they're missing this. What about this? The farmers won't agree with this. This is good on paper, but not in reality. So it can challenge some of the preconceived ideas of a lot of researchers. I can say that because I'm a researcher myself, so I can criticize myself. So that's just a way to look at this, ensuring genuine multi-actor knowledge sharing and practice. This is a big one because it's about fair participation and decision making. And I think the word power comes into play here. True co-creation in these Horizon Europe proposals require they require more than diverse partners, not just element one that I've mentioned. It also requires that there's fair and inclusive decision making structures in place to ensure that they're not only multi-actor in name, but also in practice. So that challenges, say, the theatre, for example, that we had mentioned. If there's a participatory governance embedded into the proposal, through transparent, consensus-based structures from proposal to delivery all along, it can help sustain engagement and accountability. Accountability is a big one there as well, because there's a sense of co-ownership then if everyone has accountability. And if you avoid this dominance, if there's prevent this over concentration of influence by strong actors, traditionally strong actors, again, if they align with the ethos of the multi-actor approach, their influence obviously is fundamental to tie it all together. But in order to enact the true value of multi-actor, the academics or the industry professionals need to expand their horizons and their minds to bring in those extra voices, and not only to bring them in, but to listen to them and implement them. A degree of power sharing, and in a lot of cases that can be challenging. But say, for example, if the evaluators are now looking for that, that's what's going to make the difference, that this is actually needed. So essentially to empower all relevant voices, to ensure equity by elevating the traditionally underrepresented partners in decision making. That's a key point in relation to this, that they may not in the past, but in the future, their voice is now being taken into account on a much more serious basis. So this hypothetical consortium, for example, embeds this inclusive leadership and shared decision making. And by doing so, it's building a trust and a promotion of a joint ownership. This isn't just an academic institution. Actually, the farmers are also to the fore, the farm organizations, the maybe the local action group who's dealing with the rural issues more broadly, but also they can enhance the economic viability and sustainability of that region. So they all have a voice, and particularly those who are overlooked can help shape the project. Um, so inclusive governance from the start, a co-governance board, and have balanced representation from those various actors that I've mentioned. Um, ensure that all partners have a voice. Feedback loops. So if there's a regional farmer panels and community representatives to provide ongoing input and empower those marginalized voices that I've mentioned. There could be younger breeders, younger farm organizations, and more remote upland communities that traditionally may not have had a voice, but under the new and improved multi-actor approach focus, those voices are now needed. And again, it all goes back to what happens after the project ends, the action on the ground, the co-ownership, the trust in the results, the interpretability of the results in a certain region. So that's something around the decision-making process. Very importantly, the embedding gender equality and inclusive practices. Again, this is something that's to the fore in such proposals. And in order to build an inclusive and impactful one, gender equality and wider inclusion must be embedded into the structure and the culture of the consortium, not just add it, because these diverse voices strengthen innovation. Regardless of their gender or background, it can help foster creative and relevant and lasting solutions. And representation matters. By supporting women and minority voices, ensure sustainability in the project as a whole. And align this with, within the proposal to say the Horizon Europe's gender equality strategy, just align it with what's there as well. And if you do enhance participation, if there's more equity, inclusive practices can help break down the barriers, silos in research and innovation by unlocking the untapped knowledge that exists out there. And there's plenty of it out there. It just needs to be brought to the fore and listened to. Again, this hypothetical consortium, it can help bring it to life by establishing a diverse and representative co-creative process that reflect the real world complexity. And the real world is important there, and the diversity of these upland communities. So there's inclusive leadership, there's gender balance targets across the consortium, even at the broader project steering group. Increased focus on female representation and the technical decision-making leadership roles. There may be a really impactful female geneticist that's working on livestock production. Bring them to the fore. It's very important to have inclusivity. Um, the diversity needs to be celebrated. Highlight upland agri-environmental, agri-advisory, businesses, women-led research teams working on agroecology, as I mentioned, and also equitable access. Again, to go back to what I said, the European Union, culturally diverse, different languages, it's amazing, but there are challenges when you're talking about one project dealing with a certain topic. You need to include these elements to make sure that these linguistically, culturally, geographically marginalized upland communities can use these tools. They're multilingual, they're adaptable to certain regions. And finally, the last one is this demonstrating co-creation in dissemination exploitation plans. This isn't just about research partners. We need to have a lasting impact and a clear return on investment. Again, massive projects, big investment. How do they have longevity? A user-led communication that can be trusted in a more real-world context, a shared amplification of the message, actively shape and spread the project outcomes within the networks. That if everyone has a co-ownership and a voice here, it's more inclined to be invested in it and to spread the word essentially. Sustained impact. So if you can embed co-creation, it can help build momentum, as I said, and this lasts beyond the project's funding period. And I can say it from an Irish perspective, we had 58 very successful EIP agri operation groups under the last rural development program, but now they're all finished. And a lot of that funding, it can be argued, is almost lost, the impact, because there hasn't been the sustained impact. And it has been a shame. So it's about the project setting forth the longevity and creating those platforms for continued dissemination exploitation. So it's moved beyond one-way communication to embed the results in real-world advisory systems, policy instruments, and business models, and ensure this lasting impact for the sheep sector in the upland regions of Europe. Collaborative communication. There's a lot of dissemination strategies, be it across policy, research, and practice, but to ensure that each will have an avenue, you'll have to have a diverse communicative, and I suppose for partners, it's important to have a communication element in your proposal team and share pilot farm success stories. Bring the real farmers to life, the stories to life through real world impact and sharing those stories. And if you can empower, say, local ambassadors such as experienced sheep farmers or leverage trusted networks such as national organic certificate bodies, it can help amplify uptake. It's really just to have a bigger picture that it's not just research publications that are going to come out of this project. It needs to have a wider reach. So if you're all going to tie it together, again, these slides will be shared and you'll be able to reference this back. There's text in them and I haven't read it word for word, but I'm trying to synopsize it as I go along. But to develop the balanced consortium that values the lived experiences of farmers, for example, just as much as scientific expertise. Embed mutual learning. Mutual learning is important here. Real world knowledge shapes genetic innovation, for example, in relation to that project. Ensure fair decision making, giving an equal voice to all, from remote sheep breeding organizations to national ministries, for example. Champion inclusion and equality, recognizing rural women, minority groups to young farmers, and co-created dissemination plans. Ensure that the tools or the outputs are taken up, scaled, and sustained after the funding ends. Very important. So it's co-creation, not just in principle, but in practice. Again, I'm not going to go into it all, but here's a hypothetical multi-actor consortium. These aren't real organizations. I've changed a few words here and there in relation to partner examples. But you have a mix of the science, academia, government policy, industry, business, and science community. So you have everyone from an academic institution coordinating it, but also an academic institution with a focus on grazing systems and animal genetics. You have a more policy alignment with knowledge exchange. You have Upland Farming Advisory and Training Centre, Upland Sheep Breeders Cooperative. Then to align yourself morely with the organic farming development, you have one of those in a certain member state. Again, this is all hypothetical and these are pseudo names, but you also cover the Green Uplands National NGO and Women in Farming Sheep Farming Cooperation in Romania, for example. Again, their role is diverse, but if they all have a voice, it would have a great impact on improving the sustainability and genetic performance of sheep farmers in upland regions across Europe. That's just an EU-wide consortium. And it is aligned to the values of the multi-actor approach. Again, this is all like the best case scenario, but it's about everyone here pushing for this and emphasizing this and making the commission aware of this and the evaluators more importantly. And again, we're in this AI era, and hopefully the use of this checklist, for example, can safeguard. If you can incorporate those elements and those actors and the power sharing, giving everyone a voice, you can safeguard the human element whilst still using these tools to streamline it. This is the era we're in, but just to safeguard. So looking ahead, the aim would be to make your project as inclusive and impactful as it is innovative. Hot off the shelf, as Jordi and Mark mentioned at the very beginning, the the Horizon Europe call is now available, the pre-publication. The final program will be planned soon. This is hot off the shelf. We're in this space. Partners, coordinators are looking for partners to fulfill the multi-actor approach criteria, and Premier's other tools, brokerage events, etc., can give you access to those. Um, so it's well timed, this event. We have synopsized this into a two-page tool sheet, the checklist. It gives you elements. Of course, there's so much depth to this, but this is the key in 2 pages. It could be a useful reference to refer to. Also on Zenodo, the more comprehensive database, it's now linked, say, even with the in by doing so, you're linking it back to research and having a unique identifier to link back to policy again. So it's just to keep it in the proper realm here. We're reaching different stakeholders with our outputs. So I just wanted to reference that we're trying to embed this into research and policy already and practitioners. I presented this poster at the Conference of Irish Geographers last week, for example. A lot of interest from say from the research perspective around the multi-actor approach because they're starting to see now that it's actually needed and there's more it's needed in a truer sense than before. So there's an intrigue in relation to this even amongst in academia that actually what they've been doing in the past isn't it wasn't best practice. And now when we're challenging them, Premier are challenging them, saying, well, if it doesn't include this, and that has a knock-on impact into evaluation. So yeah, these are the tools that are needed. So if you have any key takeaways, use this checklist early and throughout the process. Build this diverse, balanced consortium across the quadruple helix. Embed genuine co-creation, fair participation, gender equality, and prioritize stakeholder-driven dissemination exploitation. So this authentic multi-actor engagement strengthens eligibility, innovation, and uptake. So it's time to move beyond compliance towards real collaboration. And that's just an example of an EIP operational group that was held in Ireland. Again, everyone in that picture was from research to farmers to advisors to ecologists, just really, really in motion. And I would love to see that this would come to the fore at a bigger scale. Before I end, I would just like to mention one aspect that probably don't have time to go into today, and there are partners from the Baltic Study Centre that are involved in the Premier that are delving into this in much greater detail and much more knowledge. But it's important to remember that there's three different types of Horizon Europe projects. There's the research innovation, innovation action, and coordination support outcomes. And when you're looking at the outputs of each, so the R&I will include scientific tools and research. IA outputs focus on market-ready solutions, and the CSA outputs drive policy and systems change. But to really simplify it, the nuts and bolts of what's needed, the multi-actor approach is used to co-create research questions and validate findings with end users in relation to R&I. The innovation actions, multi-actor helps pilot, test, and deploy innovations in real-life settings. And in relation to the CSA, which Premier is, it enables policy co-creation, best practice sharing, and multi-actor dialogue, just like we're doing today. So again, a very simplified, and hopefully if there's questions for that, there's partners on the project that are delving into this. So I just wanted to point it out that we're all just aware of this as well. So thanks very much for your attention. As we say in Gaelic, Goramagib Golair, and I kept it a little bit over the time, but there was a lot to cover. So thank you.